especially the last 2-3 years with the market being as bad as it's been, and people being, needing those jobs that much more. I should imagine, and it perhaps being multiple rejections. It's going to get to you, right? It gets to us. So we'll keep. It's so easy to classify candidates, clients, recruiters, designers, research. We're all people at the end of the day, right? And we will react in different ways, but ultimately, the more negativity you get, the more likely you're going to be to break. But yeah, it's tough.
Nick,
Danny,
thank you. Thank you for coming.
my pleasure.
This is for me is going to be quite an interesting conversation because in the podcast so far, we've mostly I've mostly spoken to designers, principally designers, mostly UX-y type people, but we're starting to bridge out a little bit now and speaking to founders and stuff. But I guess I wanted to talk to you because I think of the design sector and the design industry as a system. It's a system of people, and we're all doing slightly different roles. And of course, designers are the obvious part of that system. But I really recognize, and recruiters have been a big part of my journey. I've interacted with them over the years, and so I just felt like it'd be really great to bring a recruiter perspective into this. So thank you for coming. That's really, I thought you'd be a great voice to share.
Flattered to be asked. Yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, glad to be part of that system. And yeah, I think we've played a decent part over the years. Obviously, sometimes not always so decent, depending on which recruiters you're dealing with. But yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, well, it'd be great to get into some of that and just reflect on that. But I think just to sort of ground it, I'm still like, sometimes I sort of try and give people a bit of a, this is their bio, but I'm actually thinking it's better to have it from you. So I wonder if maybe you can just share, like, how did you arrive in this role that you're in today? Like, where did you begin? I think I heard that you actually started with graphic design at university or something. Is that right?
Similar. So I've always loved cars and motorbikes and transportation generally. Anything that's got an engine and makes loud noises and goes pretty fast, I've been quite keen on. And I used to be able to draw, and so for a long time I wanted to be a car designer. So I went to Coventry and did the transport and product design degree there, and yeah, passed my degree. Probably had a bit too much fun, but managed to pass still. And the first year after my degree, I worked as a designer for an architectural studio, but it was a lot more sort of AutoCAD. It wasn't the sort of sweepy colouring in, swipey lines that I thought I'd be doing. And after a year of that, I thought I wanted to get abroad and just experience some of that, but not be skint. So that led to me getting a job in sales abroad. And then I did that for a year and a bit, then found myself back in London, where I'm from. I thought, right, I'm back here now. What do I do? And, I was early 20s, just wanted to make some cash, and found out about this thing called recruitment. At the same time, I was looking at roles in a estate agency because it was quite a low barrier to entry, as you can imagine. But I've had experience in sales on the phones, and I thought recruitment sounded marginally better than being an estate agent. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the thought process I had at the time. And I wandered into IT recruitment, which is quite a broad sector. I think quite a few recruiters start their careers there. And I did that for just over 3 years. Things went pretty well, but then I had a bit of a word with myself, and I thought, am I actually going to continue doing this for, I mainly worked for banks, and I was wearing my suit and pointy shoes and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought, am I actually going to do this for another 30, 40 years, whatever it is? And the answer was no. And at the time I did think about going back into the design sector. And, but then I got told about these other recruitment agencies who focus in design. And that made a bit more sense to me. And then I found about this agency who needed someone to cover their UX desk. I don't think I'd ever said UX or user experience before that point. But then when it was explained to me, I kind of felt like I got it. And,
what year are we talking about now? When are we talking? What year?
This would have been this would have been 2012.
Okay,
2011.
yeah. So UX was sort of beginning to rise at that point. Like, it was kind of really,
Yeah,
yeah,
2011, and it was a lot of short-term freelance information architecture roles back then. I was finding, a few permanent positions as well, but a lot of we needed guys or person to come in and sit in the corner and do some wireframes for a week. And it's been funny to watch that progression over time. But yeah, so that's where I started. All made sense, and for me, although I wasn't designing per se, at least, well, I wasn't designing at all, but at least I was looking at portfolios. I was using that part of my brain a little bit more to understand, processes, and there's I think to a degree there's some similarities in terms of my background with understanding ergonomics or anthropometrics, and user centricity, I guess, and thinking about how portfolios are demonstrating that. Obviously, less so on the visual side, which was probably more my bag at the time. But yeah, and it worked, and I stuck with it. I enjoyed it, and now over 14 years later, I'm still doing it, still specializing in UX recruitment, as well as product design, service design, user research, everything within that umbrella. In recent times, the market's been pretty tough, so I've turned my hand to a few other roles as well, just to keep the lights on. But my
really
core is still within the UX umbrella, if you like, or the product design
interesting.
umbrella.
That's very interesting, because I've been having conversations with designers about doing that too, like that diversification. And just because there's quiet patches and stuff like that. And I hadn't ever thought that it would extend to recruitment, but of course, like, if it's quiet for design, it's quiet for recruitment, right?
Y- Yeah, I guess the nuts and bolts of recruitment, it's not rocket science. You might be surprised to hear, but I guess it's I think a lot of the time you're trained in order to make more of a name for yourself, to specialize in an area, you've got more chance to do it. Because,
Yeah.
recruitment, I guess much like the UX and product design market over the last few years, had been seen as a way of, low barriers to entry and, potentially quick cash within a relative short space of time, compared to what some other industries where you might have to spend longer skilling up before you get to those bigger salaries and bigger revenue take homes. And I guess a similar story was told by, various boot camps or trends within
Yeah.
UX and product design, and that it's come to fruition in some cases, but not all.
How,
So yeah,
how,
so that's
how
it.
would
So
you,
specializing. Go on.
no, no, go on, please.
I was going to say, so specializing has been a way of, you can make more of a name for yourself by really getting to grips with your network, knowing what they do, being part of the sector. Whereas if you're someone who's specialized, well, not specialized, but more of a generalist, you can probably sell yourself as someone who's going to be able to cover more areas. But I guess that the sort of reason for a client using you will stop at that point. And where they want someone more specialist, then it's not going to, it might not work in your favor so much. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, recruitment, the actual nuts and bolts of recruitment, is the same whatever role you're
What,
covering.
just
Largely
for
speaking.
people that might not be familiar, because it's something that, like, I'd say to my mum all the time. So it's a recruiter on the phone, and like, could you explain, like, how, in your words, like, what is the role of a recruiter? Just for people that maybe like new to the market, or maybe just haven't even really dealt with recruiters. Like, how would you describe what a recruiter does in this market? Like, what is their
Yeah,
role? Because it's going to
I guess
change, right?
yeah, yeah, I guess in simple terms, we're matchmakers, right? So you've got a company who needs someone for their team, which whatever skill set they need, whatever skill set is missing from their team, or they need adding to take it to the next level, what have you. And then you've got job seekers, and obviously people who potentially will fit that mold, who will fit that brief. And we have to go to market, we have to get the clients. That's where a lot of it starts. And then find, get the brief, understand what they're looking for. That goes past just a technical fit. We're talking about culture fit. Obviously, there's things like salary or financial fit, and all these other tick boxes that we need to then go to market, go to the candidate market, see who could fit, who's interested, why they're interested, and put the two together, and hopefully other things will match as well in terms of as I said, the culture, the financial expectations. These days, a lot more to do with hybrid working. Is it going to fit the amount of days they want to be in or acceptable for. So so in simple terms, that's it. And I said before, it starts with the clients. That actually, I also think a lot of success comes through initially talking to candidates, to people
Yeah,
within the market,
I was going to
and
ask
that's when
this.
you can
Yeah,
really grow your knowledge.
yeah, because I guess like there's a sort of there's a real human component to this because like I can hear the nuts and bolts side of it of like it's a matchmaking thing. You're trying to match culture and skills, and are they right fit, and is the client happy, and da da da. But somewhere in that is someone who might have had a kid,
Yeah,
maybe they've just been divorced, and they're talking to you and like you're having to kind of like work out where they are, not
yeah,
not so much on paper, but like off paper, I guess.
yeah.
Is there a kind of like a human side of it that
I like I
is
like
part
to
of
think there's
this?
a human side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's our justification for AI not taking our jobs just yet. But yeah, I think there's a certain amount of detective work you have to do, and I guess what's the word? Emotional maturity that you need to deploy in order to figure out, okay, well, what really is this person's reason for looking for a job, or what is their real motivation for this job that I'm talking about? Are they truly interested? Are they using it as leverage to get promotion or raise? I guess there's only so much you want to pry into their backgrounds or what's acceptable to ask in terms of their personal situations, but
Mm.
inevitably you will pick up on things, and that might flag something that makes you think, actually, is this going to be the best move for them? Equally, I could pick these things up when talking to a hiring manager on the client side as well. Everyone's talking about a great culture, but this person keeps going on about bean bags and how they get lunch break, or I'm obviously being facetious, but is that really a great culture? Is that culture really going to fit this candidate? And I guess also when you're looking at other things past just the CV, portfolios, you got to give that much more attention as to, because they're so subjective, especially the more visually orientated ones. Is this really going to be the right place for the candidate, or for the other way around in terms of that match? There's so many different nuances as to what will make someone a right match, and sometimes someone won't look like a right match, but for whatever reason they are the right match because of things that are said outside of the job brief or outside
what
of the CV or outside of the portfolio.
what makes like a really good recruiter good? Yeah, how do what are they doing that makes them really good, do you think?
I think there's loads of different things. I think one of the key things is resilience. People talk about it being a real roller coaster, and it really is. There's another term in recruitment, which is champagne and razor blades, where you can be on a real high
Champagne and
sometimes.
razor blades.
Yeah, that sounds a bit high. That sounds a bit
Really?
bit
No,
drastic.
I've not heard that. Really interesting.
Yeah, for example, one of the best feelings would be obviously placing someone in a role. It's
Yeah.
great, especially if you've got to build up a rapport with that person, and you really feel for that person. You're not thinking of them as great, that person's got a job, I'm going to get commission. More of a, oh great, this person, I've got to know them, and
It's a
there's
significant life
yeah,
stage for that
it's a
person.
life-changing thing.
Yeah.
If it's a permanent role, or even just a contract, if you've improved that person's life in some way, and when you get to know that person, it becomes even that much more special, I guess, when you get them that job.
Can
And
you
then,
can you think of can you think of a particular example like where someone that you placed that had quite an impact on you as a recruiter, like because it was significant? Have there been some over the years where you just thought like,
yeah, you know what? There's a few. I think, for example, there a lady who had come back from maternity leave. She was a lead level UX designer, come back into this market, which we all know is pretty dire. They're starting to create a bit of a gap on her profile. She's come on mat leave, so totally reasonable as to why that's happened. But then her role got made redundant, and it was tough. It was looking tough, and to be able to find her a new job, a really good new job, that's obviously very, very satisfying for her and her family. And I guess one of the ones that really sort of stands out to me from further back would be a lady who she was working outside of London as a web designer, essentially, or a junior UX designer. And for whatever reason, I was working with an agency at the time who they wanted a junior, but they wanted someone who had a bit of extra oomph about them, a few other things, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell on a CV. And I can't remember how I found her profile, but it meant moving to London. Like, she was based, as I say, in the countryside outside of London, and it was a big move for her. And the salary was all right. I think she had to have pot noodles for a little while, but she made it through. And it was for her. I think it was a real big break in her career, because very easily she could have got lost outside of London and
Right.
gone from one small place to another small place. And instead she came to this agency, which was an independent agency. And we're not talking about like a big giant like AKQA or anything, but it was an independent agency. And there she really sort of, I think, could cut her teeth that much more, develop that much more. And she went from there to another role, and now she's lead level product designer. And she's doing really bloody well. And I'm not saying it's all thanks to me,
No,
but
no.
partly thanks to me.
Yeah,
But,
no,
but
you're part of that journey.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
part of
So
that team.
things like things like that they stick out. I mean, there's been obviously quite a few, but I guess on the other hand, when we were talking before about the roller coaster, the ups and the
The razor
downs,
blades.
the razor blades. Yeah, so that's the champagne. The razor blades would be, a lot of us will work for free, right? If we're working a role, unless it's retained, unless we've agreed with the client that, right, we're going to work this role, we're going to be the only ones who work this role, you've got to pay us, a third up front, a third at interview stage, and a third at placement, for example. That's a typical retained model. A lot of us will work on a contingent basis. So we're a bit like an estate agent, I guess. We're showing you houses, we're showing you people, and until you actually buy the house or you buy the person, there is no fee.
So
So, it can be quite demoralizing if you're spending a lot of time working a brief and then for whatever reason, the job doesn't happen, or they pick someone else from another agency or direct or what have you. But I guess the other part of it is, if you spend a long time, dealing with a candidate, for example, and you see them through all the different stages, and we talk about what a good recruiter does, I think, being on hand with that person, being that support person every step of the way, we'll brief them properly, tell them about the role. Then we get to an interview stage. We'll prepare them about, who's going to be in the interview, what kind of questions they might ask, how best to prepare. And that might go on for, 2 stages, 3 stages, 4 stages. Perhaps there's a task, perhaps there's a portfolio review, perhaps there's an in-person. Anyway, we're there every stage, making sure the client knows what's going on, the candidate knows what's going on, right through to offer stage. And then at offer stage, it won't finish there. We might need to negotiate a little bit on the candidate's behalf. There might be a bit of to and fro over, days in the office or whatever, all those other little bits, just to make sure we get it over the line and that person is happy to start. The client's happy for them to join the team, and everything's rosy. And I guess you can get to that stage and something happens and that candidate decides not to show up,
yeah,
or within a week they realize for whatever reason it's not the right fit, or they found a better job that's
life.
paying
Yeah,
more, whatever. Or the client figures, actually, what, this team fit isn't
yeah,
right after all. You'd like to think after that many stages that's been worked out, but sometimes it doesn't.
it happens.
And I
Yeah,
guess as a recruiter, to go through all of those stages, go through all that preparation, go through all the sort of digging around with the offer, and making sure everyone's happy, then for it to back out or fall on its face and end up with nothing still. And then and you might get to work the role again, but it's almost like having to do it all over again for the
you know
the
what?
final it can be really demoralizing.
What came to mind with that is I was like, God, it's a bit like doing a pitch, or as a designer, you work on something for ages and then they just like, um, they sort of deprioritize that feature. I think I've worked on a website once and I spent 3 months on it, and then they're like, oh, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, that must suck, right? I guess the only thing is that while
I
you're
got
doing
paid.
that, you're getting paid.
I got
Yeah.
paid. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I get how, it would be disappointing. Um, but yeah, at least you're getting paid. So that could be a real kick in the teeth sometimes.
What's it like? So I'm so curious. Like, yeah, I've had it. when I've, gone, I think, especially in the early days when I had, I think it was, I was interviewing, and like, the recruiters phoning me up before, and it's like we were on a journey together, they're like, are you outside? I'm like, yeah, I'm outside. Okay, well, good luck. Have you got everything you need? It's a bit like a parent, like, because I was like,
Yeah.
20, 22, 23. And it's sort of like, as soon as I come out, I'm phoning them, go, I've just done it. I'm walking downstairs.
Yeah.
I was sort
Yeah.
of there with them, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then they phone me up and they're like, how do you think you did? And I'm like, yeah, I think I did all right. And they go, Danny, you got it. And it's just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean, is that's
It's,
part of the experience for you, right? I
yeah.
mean,
It's a
is
great
that,
feeling
is that
for us to be able to.
chime?
Yeah, it's great. I think when we talk about recruiting, I think a lot of us will prefer to be known as consultants, or sometimes I like to think there's some relationships out there which are much more agent-esque. When you think of someone's a football agent or some sort of pop star's agent, and they're always on hand. The woman's like working as a publicist almost, and I kind of like that. I kind of feel like I'd like those situations where I'm that close to the candidate. Obviously, the scale in which we need to work on won't
It's
always
that
be.
kind of relationship, isn't it? It's a different
Yeah,
relation. It's less transactional. It's a bit more
exactly.
holding and caring rather than sort of here's a
Yeah.
role, see you later.
Yeah, I might have that relationship typically a bit more with some contractors because we have to go through that process a lot more often. But it's nice to be able, because I know what makes them tick, and the trust is there. That's probably one of the biggest things. And we can be very sort of open. I like to think we're always open, but very open with thoughts about the role or the client, or how it's going to work, or the fees. Very always happy to be open with what we're taking home as well. And it works, and it's a nice feeling when it pulls off as well. And on the other side of that, when we have to go through that process and deliver the bad news that they didn't get the job,
Yeah,
that can
right.
be really gutting to do as well, especially when that person has been really keen for that particular job, or they really need a break. And so to be the bearer of bad news is, again,
Yeah,
it's the other flip
you
side.
must be that you must be on a few calls where there's quite an emotional response, like someone's crying and
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a couple of times I've had that over the years. But I think maybe generally when someone's really sort of upset about it, I feel like the call that they sort of might cut the call short, and maybe they were
yeah,
cry off the phone
yeah,
or something like that. But yeah, I should imagine. I mean, especially the last 2-3 years with the market
yeah.
being as bad as it's been, and people being needing those jobs that much more.
It
I should
means
imagine,
more.
and it perhaps being multiple rejections. It's going to get to you, right? It
Oh,
gets to us. So it's so easy to classify candidates, clients, recruiters, designers,
yeah,
research. We're all people at the end of the day, right?
yeah,
And we will react in different ways, but ultimately, the more negativity you get, the more likely you're going to be to break. Yeah,
yeah. Like,
it's tough.
tell me about it. Yeah, like the market. I mean, what
Big
it's
question.
mental. Like I feel like really, like cliche, but I've never seen it like this before.
Yeah,
Like
because I mean, so
when
how?
I started, like way
Yeah,
back in 2002, I think it was, I came in just on the back of a crash. And there
mm,
were the old timers who were going, oh, dot-com bubble burst, and and there'd be people used to be on 300 a day, and I'd be like 300 a day, like I'd never even heard of day rates like that.
yeah,
I thought it was amazing, and they're like, now it's down to 150, 200, and I was like, that's loads, 'cause I was
yeah,
living in
yeah,
a tiny bedsit in Kennington, but
yeah.
I guess it feels to me like it, something is different this time. But how do you see it? Like, what do you think's happening? Like, what
Yeah, you know what? I just think it's a massive melting pot of a load of crap stuff that has just led to this really um, prolonged era of downfall. We had, post COVID, we had that boom, a couple of years of, it was great, lots of hiring happening, lots of people progressing in their careers, perhaps a few progressing a bit too quickly, but nonetheless, things were pretty positive in the market. And actually, from experience, so that was off the back of COVID. Obviously, that was a quiet period during lockdown. When I started my recruitment career, it wasn't UX, that was in tech recruitment. That was going into 2000, going into 2008 when we had that recession. And I think that was nothing compared to what we've gone through in the last 2-3 years. I think we bounced
Agree
back
with
from
that.
that one a lot
Yeah,
quicker. This one,
yeah.
so by the end of 2022, when I think that redundancies were starting to be made with some of the big boys out there, and then that was starting to trickle through into
Mm,
2023, and that's where
mm,
every week we were hearing about mass redundancies, and slowly but
mm.
surely, lots of clients were starting to freeze budgets and stop hiring, and obviously that pulled through into 2024. And being the ever hopeful and optimistic recruiters we are, I think that right next, it's seasonal, or it's going to get better. After April, new financial budgets, that's going to get better. Summer, people are away, people can come back, then it's going to get better. And there would be blips of it getting better, but it would be like a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then go back to being squashed right down again. And I think, even this year is a better year, I think, overall than the last two. Um, Moving up and towards the summer, I felt like we were almost close to calling ourselves busy. Then and then summer happened, and August came along, and things were quiet again. Again, it's sort of taken a while to come back, and it does seem like it's genuinely busier in the market. I guess for us, it's taking that much longer because so many clients are still hiring direct, and I get why. I can think of it as a bit of a false economy sometimes, but so it's taking a bit longer to pull through to our side. But in terms of the reasons, I just think there's so much to do with it. The economy probably being the biggest, and interest rates where it's not been economically viable for clients to grow their teams, because they're not making enough revenue, because there's people aren't spending enough because of the cost of living, etc. So if our clients aren't making the money, they're not going to be so inclined to grow their teams. There's a lot of tech startups where they might traditionally borrow from banks in order to again grow their teams. Interest rates super high, again, it's
You
not going
know,
to be economically viable.
it's not even just startups. Like when I was at John Lewis, they get loans from the bank to work
Right.
on projects. I was like, what? Like
Yeah,
I
you
think
wouldn't have thought of that.
yeah, yeah. So like, and I was speaking to an investor recently, and he was just telling me, he's like, it's all about interest rates, and he's
Mm,
like, high interest rates, loans are expensive, people don't, work. And I was thinking about, the term capex, which is a new term to
mhm.
me, but it's basically like money outside of the regular, the regular
Yeah.
budget, if you like, and which just basically means you've got a loan. And all contract work, when I was a hirer, was all on capex funds, so
Mhm.
basically like loans. And so,
Yeah.
like when I understood that, I was like, oh, so the interest rates go up, big enterprises and startups struggle to get cheap loans, and so they
Mm,
can't hire contractors who are primarily going to be the ones that pretty dicey if you're putting the permies on a loan. So it's
yeah.
probably going to be contractors, and so like I just see it all tied to interest rates. So that was one perspective. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but that was what someone
Yeah.
shared with me. I
Oh
thought that was
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's definitely a big point part of it. So yeah, and I mean, I think also, I mean, we couldn't get through a podcast these days without mentioning AI. But I think
yeah.
the budget, budget allocation. So I haven't necessarily seen lots of direct replacements for, we're going to get rid of this designer and replace them with an AI bot or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Some,
Mr. AI
it's more the
product.
budget. Yeah, so relocating focus and budget, which I guess is kind of a direct a replacement anyway. But yeah, it's that budget and that focus towards, right, we're going to cut down this team and we're going to spend more on investigating AI. And I guess certain processes as well have been streamlined through AI. And, a lot of teams have been really slimmed down. I mean, to be fair, maybe some teams needed slimming down. Maybe they're a little bit too fat post COVID, with that boom, and they're taking a lot of money off the P&L. And it's been strange because I feel like there's been a lot more marketing projects out there. Some of the really meaty strategic work, I think, has been maybe deemed as expensive, and people just want to put some band-aids on the P&L before that point. And that means maybe all sort of tactical, um, tangible work that they can see or feel, and some of that more strategic work that would require more user research, for example, or more in-depth thinking, maybe that's been up on the back burner for a bit.
I think the money gets diverted from R&D and goes into marketing. That's what I've
That's what
seen
it
when I've
felt
been
like. Yeah.
inside. Like marketing never short of cash, and then they end up commissioning projects. Typically, they're not going to be thinking about R&D and UX and stuff, but then eventually they fumble into it because they bought some platform and it doesn't really work and all this kind of
Yeah.
jazz.
Yeah, I mean, how have you been finding it with calls? Because obviously, giving your, because I found like service design, for example, has come back a bit. We've had a few more service design gigs over the last 6 months or so compared to how many we had over the last 2-3 years. I still feel like user research is lagging behind a bit though. But are you getting
Yeah.
less calls yourself, or?
Well, you know what? I talked about this with Gavin as well the other day. Like my strategy to survival, right, is to be a bit of a chameleon.
Mhm.
And I guess so. I was like a UXer straight up. That's what we called ourselves, like
Yeah.
a UX consultant, UX designer, and that meant that I did research. That meant that I did service design. That meant that I did product design to an extent, although that was sort of like UI design might handle it and stuff. And then now I kind of I had a real rocky moment. I think it was like start of this year, and it was like I was going for product design jobs because I just thought, oh well, they're all calling it product design now, and that's pretty much what I've been doing. I'm pretty good on visuals. I'm not brilliant, but nothing. I got
Yeah.
nothing back, and I'd
Right.
never had that experience, and it was really humbling and painful, and I had a real existential crisis. I was saying to my wife, I was like, I'm going to be working down, like the local Mackies or something. Like my career's
Yeah. Right.
over. Like
Yeah.
I've never had this. I think I applied for maybe like I don't know. I didn't go for the whole like pray and spray thing. So I probably did like maybe 15, 20 job things. And I spent a while crafting those CVs, nothing. Not even a call back. No, I think I got one and then it got cancelled or something.
Yeah.
So I think that was really galling. And then I managed to pick up a UR gig, which was all in GDS and stuff,
Mhm.
which seemed to be the sort of where you can a place you can hide from the storm for a little bit, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
investment in GDS. And then
Yeah.
I think I spoke to you and I spoke to a few people, and I was sort of thinking like I think service design is sort of where old folk like me go, the elephants, because it's kind of like it's sort of basically what I've been doing, but it doesn't focus on the visual. I got slaughtered in Reddit recently.
Really?
I challenged this whole thing about taste that is going around a bit, and I said something like, yeah, surely AI is going to rinse taste out, and so all these people getting hired solely mainly on taste, and then all the other stuff that UXs offer, like stakeholder stuff, making sense of problems, running workshops, journey mapping, all these other things. It's sort of like great, but really it's taste, really it's Figma. And so I challenged that on Reddit, and I got absolutely hammered. Everything I said got downvoted. They were like, "You don't get it.
Yeah.
Taste is not AIable." So that seems to be how the market sees it right now. But
I
I
feel I
still
agree
I
with
don't know. Surely GPT-8, isn't it going
you.
to rinse this
I,
out?
I, I think taste is so subjective, and so yeah, I don't know if AI can do subjective to that level yet. So yeah, I have to agree, Danny. Sorry, I think I'll probably agree with the other guys, but yeah, I think you're moving to service design or focusing more on service design makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people have probably been in your position and thought, yeah, product design, I can do that. Some high fidelity stuff, I can do that. But I think there's so many other people out there who that is their focus, that they can do it a hell of a lot better. But their weaker point might be on the research side, for example. And similarly, they might see a research role or a service design role, be like, oh yeah, I've done a bit of research as a product designer, I could do that. And they would have been met with that same silence that you would have been met with when you've applied for a product design role. I guess the harsh thing is where that is your thing and you're sticking at it, and month after month you're still getting nothing back, and that is happening as well in the market. So there's two key pieces of advice that I've been giving people over the last 2-3 years. One, pragmatism. There's every chance that your next job will not be your dream job, but if it's a job that pays your bills and takes you further up into, next year, I feel like every month is a month of getting a bit better. If this job will do, and it'll get you to a point where you have more options,
Yeah.
next year or the year after, then now's the time for it. And similarly, I know a lot of contractors have gone that way. Contractors who would never have looked twice at a permanent role or even a fixed term contract, and they've taken them for that security. And the second point, being playing to your strengths, which is kind of what we've just talked about. So,
Yeah.
if rather than being that person who's getting pipped to the post because you don't have X skill or you don't have enough of that sort of taste craft in your portfolio, double down on the other thing that you're
Yeah.
really good at. If you're much more strategic, double down on that. And it's not. I'd never want to. I'd never want to put someone off of applying to a role or saying you've got no chance of getting that or what have you. But I guess it's kind of partly protecting yourself as well, like, because if you're constantly applying to roles that just you've got a very low likelihood of happening, that's going to get to you after a while. But also, I think that you only get one chance for a first impression. I was having this chat with someone the other day where if you're spraying and praying for the right role,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people like me and internal recruiters and hiring managers are going to see your profile and be like, okay, I can kind of see why you've applied to this role, but there's 50 other
Yeah.
people are much closer match than you are, so you're a no on to the next one. And then you might well see a role that really is up your street and really is a better match, and you apply to it. And then mentally I might be like, oh, this person again, I've seen this person 2-3 times for other roles. Although that time you might be the good fit, and I'd like to think I'd reassess you every single time, you're already on the back foot because in my mind you kind of a no already, so I don't know.
You want someone who lives and breathes it and dies on it, rather than someone who's maybe like bending it and twisting it a little bit. But
Yeah,
is
I
that is
think
that
I
right?
think a lot of clients and therefore recruiters, because obviously we sort of bend to the clients, well, are spoiled, really. If they
Yeah.
want someone who is a design
Hyper
product
relevant.
designer who thinks more on the UI side and wears red socks on a Thursday, they're going to get that, and
But
if
that's something, yeah. So I've shared with you that clip that Chris
yeah,
Compton was talking
yeah,
about,
watch it, it's good.
about the care in this, because we're in a market position, as you say, where it's like candidate, there's just flooding of candidates, and there's better, and recruiters can pick, and hiring managers can just choose, and so typically they'll probably go for someone who's done exactly the same role in exactly the same sector, versus the old way of thinking of, oh well, someone's a generalist and they can probably learn it in a few weeks, whatever. But that selectiveness, do you think there's a danger that that brings in a bit more of a kind of callous sort of hiring experience? Maybe somebody who, as the example Chris gave was like, someone could be a single mum or might have neurodiverse needs and stuff like that. Do you think there's a danger that people, who might have different types of needs kind of get thrown around in this and lost a bit? Do you think there's a danger of that?
I think I'm not sure about that at the profile matching stage, because I think they'll be a lot more dependent on their sector backgrounds, where they worked. I think that what you're saying now, I think, is much more relevant to what the clients might do in terms of their interview process.
Yeah,
I guess the
rather than
biggest
select.
sort of the elephant in the room might be tasks, right? And I've got to be fairly sensible with what I say. I've got to be commercial, but I do think that certain processes can go against the diversity that everyone talks about having these days. But if you really want a diverse pool of candidates and you want to be inclusive, then you need to make sure that that ports through to your interview process as well, because some of them can be quite restrictive for various different people depending on their personal circumstances. If you've got let's say a single parent who's working full time, and they've got couple of kids who have to do various different clubs after school, and then you've got the usual sort of grind during the daytime as well. Their version of doing a task, for example, is going to be a lot more pressured than someone
Yeah.
who's single with no kids and perhaps is in between jobs even and has got plenty of time to put onto a task. So I'd like to think some clients will take that into account, but I know not always.
are you able to be like principled in that way, or is that like like are you able to take that, or if you take that, are you just not getting any work? Like
Yeah, you know what?
how much as a recruiter can you influence that kind of thing? Do you think?
Yeah,
And how much do
it,
you
it
want to?
really depends on our relationship with the client. Sometimes not much at all,
Yeah,
and sometimes we can sort of be that advisor. That's the position we'd all prefer to be in.
yeah,
But I guess that will largely depend on who we're actually dealing with on the client side as well. And how open they are to hearing it. Because the other thing is as well in this market. I like to think that, we're good recruiters, we do all the right things and, really honorable when we do things transparently, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, we need the work, right? And especially in this
yeah,
market. So, sometimes if a client says like, this is our process, we do the process this way every single time, we're not going to change it. Sometimes the case of, yep, yes, sir, let's go and find these people.
yeah,
And yeah, it's difficult. It's kind of like, you might have had some people in the market. I'm just thinking in terms of like moral restrictions. Before the last couple of years, you might have had someone write,
no
Nick, I'm
tobacco.
looking for a job open to sector except not gambling or alcohol. And, and then 2 years later, market's dry, and they're working for, British Americans back at,
Yeah,
gambling companies.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I totally
Interesting.
get
Goes
it.
both ways, doesn't it? Goes both ways. When the belt has to get tightened, it
Yeah.
forces hard decisions. It makes us all question, yeah, like what our principles are. It's easy to be principled when you've got a warm, warm house and
Exactly. Yeah. And this is what I caveat a lot of what I say sometimes, because I'm in a job, right? So, okay, it's not been as good as it has been, or nowhere near as good as it has been for a long time. But, um, I've still got my bills being paid every month. So, it's easy for me to say, well, you shouldn't apply to this, or you should think about, focusing only on this area or whatever. If I didn't have a job and I hadn't been paid for months on end, and I've got a family or house or pet, whatever responsibility, I'm going to do whatever I can to pay those bills. And if that
yeah.
means all praying, I'm going to do it. So it's
You see those.
empathy. I know empathy is used a lot in UX, and I'd like to think it's used a lot on the recruitment side. But again, uh, that's probably touch and go depending on which recruiters you use.
Yeah, yeah, and you see those sort of heartbroken LinkedIn posts going around
Yeah,
these days, and I see that desperation and that
yeah,
sort of like existential kind of crisis.
mm,
Some people have been in this career industry for 20 years,
yeah,
and I see it outside UX as well. It's across the board,
yeah,
sort of like remortgaging houses. It's that kind of stuff, because
yeah.
they've just been out of work for 18 months. 24 burnt the savings down, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
and they've had the rug pulled from underneath them. I don't feel necessarily that some of them were doing anything wrong themselves individually, but the market's changed. It fundamentally has changed, and someone could have been doing all the right things and focus on strategy, and or even some of the heads of I've worked with in the past who were hadn't been hands on for 5+ years, and they've just been managing and growing teams. All of a sudden, budget's been cut, big salary, 6-figure salary taken away from them. In some cases, they might have been the key bread earner as well for their families.
Yeah,
And going forward, sure, there's a few fractional roles here and there, but not so many of those big purely strategic head of roles. So I know a lot of other people now who've been looking at more senior roles. They really want to future proof themselves and remain hands on, just in case the same thing were to happen again. And we went through a period, or still going through a period, in fact, where certain clients that I've known, or candidates I've known at head of level, have been kind of dumbing down their CV to seem a lot more of an IC, or seem a lot more hands
yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah.
in order to get the majority of roles out there.
Yeah, no, I've seen the same thing, and me myself, like I actually steered away before the market from going further up the pipe, and I went
Mm,
into IT because on a personal preference, I just wanted to be hands-on, and I felt it when I left John Lewis, and I've been there for 5 years. I've mostly been managing, and I felt this uncomfortable squeeze when I was going for
mm,
interviews. This is back in 2016 when the market was flush, of kind of
yeah,
like, So what were you actually doing then? Like, what can you say was your work? And it was like, well, I oversaw, six
Yeah.
teams, and I tried really hard, and I did loads of good things. And it's like, yeah, but what did you actually do? And I managed to cut through that and get a role, partly because of the market, and also I had some relationships there. But now the market's like it is.
Mm.
If as you say, I think there's this downsizing. My sense was as the safer places to be is in hands-on and is being IC. That was my sense of like how to navigate it. In terms of change, like we talk about the market changing. Like, is there something that you're sort of like quietly afraid might happen to the profession? In your case, like recruitment, like is there something you think like this could happen in 12 months,
Yeah,
18?
yeah. I've been doing a lot of that the last few months in terms of like questioning my life choices and
Yeah, we all
am I
do.
still going to be here doing this thing in 12 months? Yeah, absolutely. I'd say there's a few different things that have gone through my mind with that. I guess, I mean, AI is going to be one of them, but we'll go on more into that in a bit. But I guess before that point, internal recruitment, I guess, is an area where, when the redundancies were happening, and lots of internal recruiters, talent managers, etc., they were also let go because hiring wasn't happening. So, their jobs were sort of made redundant as well. As things have got a bit busier, and clients have been, regrowing their internal teams or using their internal recruitment teams, because they want to do a lot more hiring direct. That makes sense. I will say sometimes I think the specialist knowledge won't necessarily, this is a bit of a sweeping statement, won't necessarily be at the same as external recruiters who might specialize in one particular area or two particular areas, whereas a lot of internal recruiters might span a lot more depending on the setup of the company. So I guess part of me is thinking, God, for all my life I've been an external recruiter, but if all the clients are just hiring directly these days, is that an area that I'd have to go to next in order to keep afloat and be relevant still in the market? So that's I guess one area. I like to think there's still going to be a place out there for specialist recruiters. I think also internal recruitment from an external point of view had probably got a bad rap for, but this is going back years now, where it was seen as a lesser place than external recruiters who can do well, and you go internal because you're not doing so much on the business development side. That's definitely not the case now. I think that a lot of the internal positions are really desirable, and cool places to work for potentially. So that's one thing I guess that's gone through my head. The other thing, again, being the elephant in the room, is AI,
Yeah.
and these ATS systems, and that doing a lot of the first wave of screening. I guess I see that. I see that for a lot of jobs. For our sector, a bit less. I mean, it's happening. I don't know how successfully it's happening. I do hear a lot of frustration from candidates who are having to rejig their CVs to try and get past the ATS systems, and it all seems a little bit. I don't know what the word is, but just laborious, I guess. I feel like when it comes to design and UX and product design, basically where we're looking at a portfolio, I don't think AI is there yet to be able to make a proper assessment as to that match. I'm not saying it won't be, but I don't think it will be next year. I don't think it will be for a few years. I think it's probably inevitable because of
Yeah.
how fast it's growing, and developing. Now, I'm not necessarily worried about AI snatching up all the specialist roles that require that, as I said, that nuanced knowledge about what makes a good portfolio, or not necessarily good because it's subjective, but what matches this portfolio to this client's requirement, I guess. And I can get it from a CV buzzwording matching point of view, where AI could do that, or an ATS system could potentially do that, or does attempt to do that. I don't think it does it as well as I don't think it can even,
Well,
just take the
with
portfolio out of the equation.
yeah.
Still don't think it can do it as well as a specialist human recruiter, personally. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm probably biased, obviously. You talked right
Yeah.
at the start of this podcast about the other things that we pick up on,
Well, that's what I
when
was
we're
getting at.
talking to a
Yeah.
candidate. Yeah. And I guess the other thing to consider is that we talked also about people tailoring their applications per role, right? and, perhaps adding certain words into their CVs to match that particular brief. So they're almost playing the system a bit. And, the ATS system isn't going to realize that. And it's going to be like, right, well, this person has got this many buzzwords in there, and so they
Well,
must be a good fit for the role. But
isn't there that thing where people are like putting in the buzzwords and then making it the same color text
so you can't see
as
the
the page, so
yeah,
the human eye can't see it, but the ATS system sees like a whole tranche of
yeah.
keywords in size one font and white text.
That was a trick that I heard years ago before ATS
Yeah,
systems or AI was being used in recruitment, because a lot of recruiters who, typically they might be more junior, a bit newer to the game. They'll do what's called a Boolean search when they're looking for profiles via LinkedIn or a job board. And a Boolean search basically uses keywords that you want to find. Okay, so for example, if you're looking for a UX designer, you might put in your Boolean search iframes, user flows, user research, personas, and you put that into the search, and then it will flag up with the best results at the top, which CVs have got those words in there the most times. And if you're not necessarily using that sort of specialist knowledge, you might think, right, well, this person's at the top of the list. Look how many times they've mentioned wireframes and UX and user
yeah,
research,
exactly.
Figma. They must be the best fit for the job. And so that was happening years ago. So that
Yeah,
trick that you just talked about, I heard about that years and years ago.
yeah.
But again, that goes to show that you can see how ridiculous that sort of process is. So I just don't see how that makes finding the best candidates. And equally, when I'm giving people CV advice, one thing I'm never a fan of, but again, this is all subjective. One thing I'm never a fan of is on CVs where you have your summary and you have your jobs, and then people do a massive list of skills or software that they use, and it
Yeah.
takes up half the page, and it's all very generic. There's no context there as to how good they are with Figma or Adobe Creative
Just a
Suite
list of
or
words.
yeah, exactly. It's just purely a list of roles, and I'll talk to them about it, and they say, "Oh, yeah, that's the ATS system," and it's, I get it, I do get it, but for me, and I think when I'm dealing with my clients, we'd much prefer everything contextualized. So rather than you listing out wireframes, prototypes, and Figma, which gives no real indication of how good you are or how experienced you are with those,
Yeah,
contextualize it within the descriptions of work that you're doing so that I can see, oh, right, so you were doing this as part of your process, you were using that software as part of your process.
yeah,
And equally, it's like when people have those lists and then they score themselves out of five,
yeah,
or at 5 star. Again, I just don't, I get the sentiment behind it, and I get you can kind of give a sort of rough, okay, well, I'm an expert in Figma, I'm less good at, I don't know, Adobe Creative, whatever it might be, Photoshop. But you're still scoring yourself, and
thing
again, I just don't think that's giving enough
The
context
thing
for.
is, you
Yeah,
used to be able to do all that, and it didn't matter. You'd still get in,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's the truth of it, right? So all
yeah,
these things you're talking about, like putting listed words and all this, because I hired UX people, and I just look at it and go, okay, that's where they've worked, and they've got the little sliders on the skills, whatever.
yeah,
Get them in, because I'm only
yeah,
choosing between about 5 people anyway.
yeah,
So you could kind of do stuff like that, and people didn't have to have this rigor and this scrutiny on the CV. Like as a
mm,
hiring manager, I used to just leave it to the interview to work it out. But it's like I think now that's changed. I wonder, just to sort of like draw this all back, like. Is there anything that gives you hope? Like you've obviously done a bit of introspection. We all have. Like about where this industry could go next. Like, do you feel like, given what you just said about how AI isn't quite there yet, and all the humanist aspects you do, like, is there some hope that you take from this about certain? I think what we're talking about is certainty, and a
yeah,
move away from the chaos and unpredictable change. I think that's
yeah.
what
I
we
mean,
want.
I guess are we talking about the market or recruitment?
Both.
I would say the market. I would say it is showing signs that it's getting better. So for example, one thing that would traditionally be quite annoying and frustrating is when we're dealing with a person or candidates for a role, and then partway through the process they drop out
Yeah.
because they've got a different role, or
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they've got other interviews that they prefer. And as annoying as that is, it's quite encouraging now because it means that there's other stuff going
Yeah.
on.
It's an indicator, isn't it, of
Yeah,
movement.
so exactly. So that's happening more. And although we're not, covering all the roles out, or as many roles as we'd like to be covering, at least it's encouraging because it's bound to come our way the more that's happening. So I think the market is getting better, and hopefully, with interest rates getting better, that will help when the budget announcements are talked about. Then maybe that will inspire a bit more confidence as well. So we'll see. I don't think it's going to be boom time anytime soon, but it should continue to slowly get better, I think. On the downside of that still means there's going to be a hell of a lot of other people out there still looking for work. The supply and demand has been so unbalanced for the last 2-3 years. I don't suddenly think we're going to get a 50-50 balance. I still think there's going to be quite a few people out there who are struggling, unfortunately. Yeah, and I don't really know what will happen there. But as I say, it's getting better, but not to the not a steep enough angle to help the majority of people. So I think it's still going to be tough, going into next year.
And for you personally, like,
Yeah.
yeah, where are you?
Well, ironically, I was I was doing some of my soul searching via ChatGPT, my companion, about AI, and it said some things that I think I probably agree with. I think the widespread world of recruitment, and I'm not just talking about product design, UX, I'm just talking about recruitment generally. I think a lot of the roles probably will become more automated. Talking like roles from, I don't know, first line support, or more less specialist roles essentially. But something it said, and something that I've thought, is the more specialist positions will remain better suited for guys like me, specialist recruiters, to work on. And I think now more than ever, clients are looking for those diamonds, not in the rough, because there's loads of good people available, but looking for those unicorns, if you like. And when you're dealing with this sort of supply and demand, and you've got 100 applications within a week, and you're relying on perhaps your internal recruiter who's also got to manage 10 other roles, or you're a hiring manager and you've got an actual job to do that isn't recruitment, and you're looking for that needle in a haystack, that's where I'd like to think guys like me, people like me, as in specialist recruiters, will prove their value, and come into play more and more. We've had a similar situation with a client who's come to us recently, that very scenario, in fact, where they're hiring multiple roles. They've got an internal talent team. They're trying to keep as much as possible direct. And they're looking for a lead product designer, struggling to find that needle in a haystack for various different reasons. The hiring manager then was also getting involved with doing, the first, wave of screening. And, he's got a big salary, and, he's not being paid necessarily. Well, I guess he is being paid to do recruitment, but he shouldn't be being paid to do that much recruitment. He needs to be doing the design and management part. And so they've come to us with this particular role because the role's now become mission critical, and they need to get this person sorted before Christmas. And if they carry on doing it the way they were doing, they're just going to take more and more time. So yeah,
Seeing
I think there's
grassroots,
hope of next year.
yeah, you're seeing grassroots, you're seeing positive indicators. You yourself, you sound animated, and there's some hope there, I'm hearing.
Yeah,
So
I think
if you're
I'm
feeling
not.
hopeful, I'm feeling hopeful.
I feel like, yeah, but not to piss in anyone's
Cautious,
chips, but I'm still cautious. I think I'm also quite
cautiously
burnt
hopeful.
from the last 2 or 3 years, because I think one thing that I've learned over the last 2 or 3 years is that it's so hard to really predict things now.
Yeah.
As I said to you earlier in the podcast, when he talks about when we were first hit by this downturn, we're like, okay, it's going to get better after in the new financial year. It's going to get better once people are back from summer holidays. It's going to get better after Christmas. And it hasn't really significantly got better. So I'll try and think about what will happen, but I guess my confidence behind those predictions is 50-50. But yeah, I guess as I said, you've got to be resilient in this game. So I'm just there's still an ounce of that left in me,
Yeah.
and we're doing what we can to make it a bit brighter for next year. But yeah, I don't think we're dead in the water just yet. But it's still tough. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I think
cautious.
that's a good point for us to end on, and it's not necessarily what everybody wants to hear, but that's how it is, and that's the reality
Yeah.
right now. Amazing. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for this.
Okay.
Thanks for your time, and yeah, thank you.
No worries. Thanks, mate.